Way back in high school, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to study in college, but I knew that I was good in math and science. And so I just picked a generic engineering major, like mechanical engineering. For the next 4 to 5 years, I spent learning those very difficult classes, and eventually I got my degree. But by the time I got my first job as a generic engineer, I realized that everything that I learned, I wasn't using it at all. All those hours I spent learning those very difficult classes were now wasted. And sure, I was working for an engineering company, and the technical knowledge that I had helped me with my work, but I was mostly doing project management, following some internal processes for the company. But the hardcore technical knowledge that I had, I wasn't using it at all. And back in the days, I did know a little bit about programming and software from a working student position I had in college. And so comparing the two experiences, I would much rather have worked with the software as a programmer because I felt the work was intellectual. I was using my logic skills to solve a real problem. For the next 2 years, I kept working for this engineering company, but I was taking steps on the side to actually transition from being a more generic type of engineer to a software engineer. And so in this video, I'm going to be sharing the 3 steps that I took that actually led me to having a software engineering job after a few months of applying. All right, we're back in Germany, and one thing is for sure that it looks way different than Portugal. You see it's very cold, it's snowing. So if you're coming to Germany to study, that's also one thing to keep in mind, and that's what you're signing up for. That being said though, I must say it looks very nice here. I do like the snow, I think everything looks amazing here. But anyways, the single most important thing that I did to go from engineering to software was that I didn't wait until I was feeling prepared to actually start working with coding. I know a lot of people they feel like they have to finish a complete language course, a programming language course, or a university degree to start working with something. But in my case, I just sat down and tried to build something that I thought was interesting to me. In my case, it was robotics and just simply building websites. So I just picked a Raspberry Pi and started building something that I thought was cool. As a mechanical engineer, I knew that I was coming from a disadvantage because computer science students, they spend a lot of time just building stuff, working with software, and I just didn't learn those things in my classes. And so I just knew I had to spend more time just trying to solve problems and try to build things. I remember doing my first working student experience in a startup when I was still a student. And there they gave me this task that I had to put some buttons and some images on this Django website. And back then I had no idea what Django was. And just from some Google search, I saw that it was a framework for Python that you can develop websites with. But I had no idea what it was. I've never worked with it before. And so my first instinct was to actually get a Django textbook and just read it cover to cover. So I read the thing cover to cover, but by the end of it, I still had no idea how to start my task. So I was sitting in front of my computer, I just read this textbook, but I still had no clue on how to start. But instead of going back to the textbook, this time I had a different strategy. I just kept reading the code base and tried to see some patterns from other developers. And I noticed how easy it was to actually just put some images and buttons on it. I just had to actually start doing it. I just had to sit down in front of my computer and to start trying. And the same thing applies to languages. If you're trying to learn a language, like to speak in a different country, you're not gonna read a textbook from cover to cover and expect that you're gonna be fluent in that language. The only way you can really start speaking a language is to actually go to that country and start practicing every day with people around you. There's no way you can learn something just by the theory. You gotta actually implement that in practice. All right, my second point is that lead code matters at least sometimes. So if you're an engineer that wants to go into software, that means that your first job is probably gonna be a entry-level job. You're still learning how to be a software developer. You're not gonna get a senior position yet. And so in that case, my experience is that lead code matters sometimes, especially if you're going to startups. I feel like those startups, usually they tend to have you go through a lead code exercise with them. I feel like they try to copy, the Silicon Valley companies like Google, where they do that, and it's very trendy to do it. So I've had interviews at startups, and they've all asked me to solve a lead code question on the interview. That being said, if you want to work for bigger companies and more established German companies, my experience that it didn't matter that much. I've had several interviews for software development jobs where I wasn't asked at all how to solve a lead code question. They were simply asking me about my projects, my previous experiences, and from the way I was talking about it and for my questions, they could tell whether I knew about what I was talking about or not, but I wasn't explicitly asked to solve a lead code question to get those jobs. And even in my current job, I have a software developer job at a big German company, but I was never asked to solve any LeetCode questions for that. That being said, being a software engineer means that you can benefit a lot from learning LeetCode. I've seen already how learning those data structures and algorithms, they really help me with my work every day. So I'll definitely recommend that you start learning LeetCode, doing a problem every day. But they might seem very difficult at first, so the best thing is to actually get a course and do those problems at the same time that you're doing the course. So for example, you can first learn everything about arrays and sliding window, for example, and then do all the sliding window problems on LeetCode. So you do always, in parallel, the theory and practice. And that goes back to our first point, to actually start doing and not waiting until you're prepared, that you actually start doing LeetCode now, while you're still looking for a job, because that can benefit you directly on the interview, but also indirectly, later, if you do get a job as an engineer, as a software engineer, and you can actually apply those concepts in your daily job. All right, my third and final tip is T knowledge. So when I was working at this working student position for this startup, I met this very senior software developer. He had worked for Google and all these amazing companies. He was definitely a 10x engineer, like they call it. And he gave us a tip. He said that software engineers, in his opinion, must have a knowledge that's shaped like a T. What he meant by that was that we need to have a general understanding of a lot of different areas of software engineering, and that would be the head of the T. And once we find something that we really like, then we start focusing on that, and that will be the body of the T, right? So a software engineer needs to have an overall knowledge of everything, and then he needs to specialize in one thing that he really likes. And that was something that I was struggling in the beginning, because software engineering is such a broad topic that I didn't know exactly which field of software engineering I was gonna work with. There's mobile apps, there's websites, there's embedded systems, there's so many different things, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. But I wasn't too worried about that because of this software engineer. I just knew that I had to know a little bit about everything. And that's the amazing thing of building your own projects, because you're responsible for actually every single component that's gonna make the project succeed. So I was building, for example, robots that were controlled by smartphones. And so I had to develop, Android apps. I had to develop embedded software for the Raspberry Pis. And I also had to learn about how a Raspberry Pi can communicate with a mobile phone over the internet. So I had to learn about HTTP, WebSockets, and all of that stuff. And so don't worry too much about which area in specific you're gonna start with. Just get a general knowledge, and then you can specialize once you have a topic that you really, really like. But that's pretty much all that I have for this video. I hope you like these tips if you're trying to become a software developer, if you have an engineering degree. And subscribe to the channel and like the video, and I'll see you next time.